Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. I'm excited to have Josh back with us for another insightful conversation. In this episode, we continue exploring the challenges of maintaining healthy relationships after divorce. Josh shares his valuable insights into effective co-parenting strategies and highlights the critical distinction between apologies and amends, explaining how true amends involve actionable steps to correct past mistakes rather than stopping at good intentions. This is a really important discussion and quite enlightening. Together, we dive into the importance of focusing on your own actions and feelings, emphasizing that mutual respect and accountability are the foundation of healthy relationships. Without further ado, let's get right into this next part of our interview. Hello, Josh. Welcome back. I want to thank you again for taking the time to be with us today. We really appreciate your insights. We're talking about co-parenting. So for anyone who didn't get to listen to the prior episode, Josh and I were talking, well, the goal was to talk about co-parenting, which we actually ended up doing, but it was towards the end of the episode. In essence, we were talking more about relationships, but we left off and we decided to kick this to a part 2 because Josh was just starting to give us some tips on co-parenting, with the first one of keeping your side of the street clean, right? And I had just asked him, just to help get us all oriented, if he could give us a little example, either hypothetical or in his situation, his personal situation, of what that might look like. Josh, welcome back. What did I miss in that brief recap? Is there anything else you'd like to add before we press forward?
Thanks, Doc. No, I think that that's good. So to go back to this is specifically for anyone that is co-parenting with any sort of contention, let's say, when you're co-parenting, which from my experience is all. It's just a matter of how contentious is it, right? It could be, I have a buddy, him and his ex-wife get along really well. Their co-parenting does really well, but there's still 10% of the time where he calls me and just starts, complaining and talking about all the difficulties.
All right, 10%, that's not too bad, actually.
For them, they're incredible. They are the most... The healthiest version I know. For most people, it's somewhere of constant barrage of whatever, all the way to we won't even talk to each other. It has to go through judges and attorneys, right?
Oh, yeah. Very challenging.
Much more challenging. I'm more on that side, unfortunately. So I've learned a lot from that. So number one that I've learned as far as co-parenting tips goes, is it's a matter of focus is probably the best way of saying this. Where is your focus? And my encouragement to everyone listening or viewing is that your focus has to be on yourself. Now, I don't mean that in a selfish, narcissistic way. I mean, what actions can you control? So what can I control and what can I not control? And the things I can control are my side of the street, my actions, what I'm doing. Those I can control. I can't control what she or he does. I can't control what somebody else does. And frankly, trying to control that usually makes it worse from my experience. All I can control is that. So that's the first thing.
Okay. Let's get into it. Yeah.
On my side of the street and what can I control? So that is things like, how am I communicating with the other person? How am I thinking about the other person? Here's a big one. How am I communicating about the other person to other people?
Let's get a little closer to this one because I'm thinking of an example.
Let's do that. So I'll just give you a quick example. So after my divorce, it was very easy for me to play the victim, like we talked about in the last episode. So if anybody didn't listen to the last episode, go listen to that because we talked a lot about kind of victim mentality. It was very easy for me to play the victim and say, well, everything was her fault. Here's the reason why, etc. And then people that were in my life were willing to accept that and willing to not only accept it, but add fuel to the flame of that. So when I called them and said, well, here's the reason why I'm the victim. Of course, I never said it like that, but here's the reason I am the victim. They would just pour fuel on the fire and say, of course, here's all the reasons why you're the victim.
Like she's so horrible. You mean like aligning with that point of view?
The only thing that does is make it worse. The more my mind thinks how much I'm the victim and how the other person's terrible or doing something wrong or anything else, the more negative I am in interacting with them and the worse I am at keeping my side of the street clean. So people might say, well, but you need somebody to go vent to. So to a degree, I agree, but most people take that far too far. What I found is that there were a couple people in my life that I actually had to have a conversation with once I realized I need to have a pure mindset, because at the end of the day, if this is a co-parent, that means that they're a parent of your child. Mm-hmm. So don't you want your child to have the best relationship with them possible? Therefore, you need to have the best relationship with them possible that's in your control. So once I finally realized, okay, I need to have good thoughts about this person and I need to do my best to maintain those thoughts, I had to approach a few people in my life. And the next time they said something, I had to tell them, I respectfully ask that you never say anything negative about this person ever again to me. Mm-hmm. If you need to go vent it to a therapist or something, but not to me.
How did they do? They must have been a little confused, because just prior to that, the two of you were like a folie à deux, right? Like in it together, complaining about her or whatever behavior. Was that a little shocking? Were they able to do that for you?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the person, whether they're able to do it or not. And then you have to decide how you're going to engage with that person and what relationship you're going to have with them and where they fit in your life. Mm-hmm. But what I did is I just approached them the same way I just explained it to you. Mm-hmm. I realized that having any sort of negative feelings or playing the victim is not helpful to me. It's not helpful to her. It's not helpful to my children.
Yes. Wait, Josh, let me dwell on this for a second too, because you're saying something that's really important, and I appreciate the way you're saying it, because in earlier episodes, I've tried to describe this myself. So you're giving a different perspective on it, which this is something that I call the literal mode of functioning, which just basically means when you get with somebody and you're just venting, like you use that word, what I call purging, but it's not a collaborative effort to really understand something or to understand somebody else. It's more for an affective charge. And to your point, it typically doesn't lead to any progression in life or in the way that you think, or to a more complicated way of thinking about these really complicated situations. So I appreciate it. I just wanted to highlight that and just give a name for it, which is that's what we call in prior episodes, the literal mode of functioning, where you're just purging stuff out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, even I'm making these steps up on the spot. Mm-hmm. So number one is keeping your side of the street clean, seeing where your focus is. Number two is having your focus on your co-parent as the parent of your child and not as your ex, or not as something that they did to you. Okay. Because that relationship is over. Mm-hmm. So there's no point in focusing on that anymore. And if you need to focus on it, you need to go through therapy, you need to get coaching, by all means, go do it.
And when you say focus on it, do you mean like holding on to resentments, not even past, but like things that are coming up, I guess, in the process of co-parenting? Like maybe flush that out a little bit more for us.
Sure. I'm saying focus on the fact that that is a parent of your child. Don't focus on whatever your relationship to them is.
I see.
It's as simple even as what you call them. Mm-hmm. So when I talk about that person to anyone, I say the mother of my children, because I want my memory to be the fact that she is the mom of my children, and I want the best for her, and I want the best for her because I want the best for her and my children, and I want the best for my children. Mm-hmm. If I say that stupid bleep X,
yes,
where does my mind go? It goes to all the trauma. It goes to the victim mentality. It goes to whatever she did wrong. That doesn't help my children, doesn't help my relationship with her, doesn't help her relationship with the children.
And it doesn't help your children's relationship with her, because Correct. Then it puts something in their head, right?
Even if you don't. So here's the insidious thing a lot of people don't realize. This doesn't mean, I'm not just saying don't speak badly about her to your children, which is definitely true. Don't do that either. But I'm saying even if you speak badly about her or in a certain way to other people, it will still come out to your children.
Oh, yes. It seeps into them.
Trying to be positive about her to your children. If you're being negative about her to other people, those vibes will still come out to your kids.
There's no doubt. Even just to go a little bit further, the way this works, even if you're not talking about her negative to other people, but you still have these negative feelings and holding on to resentment, like osmosis, this also goes into the children. It comes out in such subtle ways. They're hard to detect. But typically when I work with these individuals and we look at things very closely, like why their child is I don't like this word, but acting out, having behavior problems, whatever, then we begin to see how this stuff seeps into them slowly over time. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that kind of goes to, step 3, not that these are necessarily in order, but, and that is, well, how do you, so some people might be listening and say, well, how do you get there? Well, the only way to get there is to go through a process of forgiveness, letting go of resentment, letting go of whatever the past hurt is of this person. And it's actually doing some really deep work to be able to get to a point where you're just not harboring all this resentment and anger towards them. Still, 7 years later, there are still people in my life that harbor resentment and anger towards the mother of my children, my ex-spouse, that I don't, because I've gone through that process, but there's still other people in my life that do. And I've encouraged them that they have to get through that at some point, because the only person that's hurting is them.
Wait, let's go over this one then. This one seems, not that the other ones weren't important, right? There's no order of importance here, right? But this one seems quite significant. So what's forgiveness, Josh? Maybe can you spell that out? Like, how are you thinking about, because I'm imagining, it seems like such an easy word, like, oh, forgiveness, but I'm guessing it's a little bit more complicated in your mind.
I think there's a few things here. The number one thing is you first have to be curious about and honest about your actual feelings and thoughts towards this person.
Okay.
That's the very first thing. A lot of people, I think, even have a hard time with that. They have a hard time admitting that there's actually anger and resentment, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, good. Okay.
But I think that most of us, there's something, and it's not a one-time deal either. Things will pop up. So the process that I went through to do this was actually part of the 12-step process. And you don't have to be in a 12-step group in order to go through this process. If you actually just went online right now and typed in anger and fear and resentment inventory, it's part of step 4. It shows you good questions to ask to figure out what anger and resentment and fear and everything that you have towards these individuals. When I first went through that process, I was trying to do it with all areas of my life as part of my healing process.
Okay.
And the majority of that was with her. And I had to deal with all that stuff. So the very first step is just being curious and actually admitting, well, these are the things. So that's the first step, is just being honest about, well, here's the actual anger, resentment, bitterness, et cetera, that I have. Then you have to go through a process of letting it go. You have to get through a process of actually realizing, like, I need to just let this go. This does not serve me anymore. It's a process of realizing this doesn't serve me. It doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't serve my kids. I need to let it go. It's not helping anything. And then the sometimes even more difficult process is trying to decide, well, now do I have to make any amends? So let's talk about that for a moment, because that would probably be, I don't know, what are we on, step 4, I think. There's a difference between an apology and an amends. And these often get confused. An apology, in my humble opinion, is pretty much worthless. It's saying, I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, I can even say, I'm sorry for swearing at you. Within that, I'm not admitting doing anything wrong. Think about that for a second. If you apologize a lot, this used to be me. I used to do this in my marriage all the time. I used to apologize all the time. But you can apologize all day long and never admit that you did anything wrong. Or take any corrective action. The difference between an apology and amends is admitting what you did wrong and then talking about how you're going to fix it.
So there's a repair.
What you're going to repair moving forward.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
And let's be clear, because this gets confused.
Sure.
Repair is not necessarily, it could be, but it doesn't always land, taking out the person that you hurt to dinner or bringing flowers, right? Yeah. Okay.
Not even close.
Maybe give us an example if you can.
Sure. I'm happy to. So when I went through, I've gone through several amends processes in my life when I've realized that I've done something wrong and I need to do something with this other person. So sometimes, this is a really good point, Doc. Thanks for bringing this up. Sometimes it's not appropriate to give an amends to somebody at all. As an example, I've worked with several men that have done something wrong in the past, and maybe that wrongdoing was just in their head and the other person wasn't even involved. And if they were to then go tell that person what happened, it would actually hurt the other person. So one thing with an amends is it can never hurt anybody. That's not the purpose of an amends. So an amends
right, because that's for you then, not for them. right? In other words, you're telling them
that would be a
something.
selfish, egotistical, narcissistic amends. If you just went and told somebody something, like if I was thinking about you inappropriately sexually, Doc, and then you never knew that, and I just came to you and I threw up on you how inappropriate you had been in my brain for so many years, that is extremely inappropriate and hurtful to you, and it does not help you at all. Right?
Yep.
So that would only be out of my own ego and narcissism.
Yep.
So an amends has to actually try to help the other person. Now, that being said, I've done amends before where people have thought they didn't need it. Okay, you don't know for sure, but it didn't hurt them. So that's the first thing, is you got to decide, well, could this hurt somebody else? Because if it should, then maybe you just need to write a letter and burn it or something else to get rid of that. If you decide that this person actually needs to receive some sort of an amends, then you have to decide, well, how you want to do it. For some people, a phone call might be appropriate. For some people, an in-person might be appropriate. For some people, a letter might be appropriate. It's up to you. You have to decide. Then, as far as corrective action, that also depends. It depends on your relationship. If you don't have a relationship with this person anymore, and it's somebody that you wronged a long time ago, again, the hope here is not to try to manipulate some sort of relationship out of this person. It's to just correct what you did wrong. So for some amends I've made, I've admitted wrongdoing. The other key element to that I didn't mention yet, so you have to admit wrongdoing. You want to try to empathize with how that made them feel. So, Doc, I got really heated with you the other day. I swore at you. I called your mom a bad name. That probably made you feel very diminished, really discouraged, maybe upset, maybe hurt, right? So that's step 2. So I admitted what I did wrong. I'm trying to empathize with how you felt about it. You don't even have to say, I'm sorry. You can if you want to. That can be a part of it, but it's not a part of an amends usually. The third part is any sort of hope you might have for the future, which may or may not occur. So as an example, when I made an amends to this last relationship I was a part of, I did not want any relationship moving forward. So what I did, I chose to send her a message because that was appropriate for us with the stage of relationship we were in. I crafted it really well with another person. You can also use AI for this, also helpful, but I also used a mentor, a coach of mine. And then it was basically, I did this wrong. It probably made you feel things like this. I wish you the very best. For people that you're going to continue in relationship with, let's say that this is a friend, a partner, somebody that you're still in relationship with, then you might want to add something like, I hope in the future, this is what our relationship can look like, or something else, right? But you don't want to put pressure on, the key with an amends is you don't want to put pressure on the other person to have to do something. You just want to be able to give this as a gift. That's a really key piece. So if I add in the end, like, I hope this means that we can get back together, that's not an amends, because you're being selfish with that. What you want to do is, I just want to admit what I'm doing wrong. Here's how you felt. I wish you all the best, that sort of thing.
What you were describing just a moment ago sounded like it's such an important part of any healthy relationship. In other words, this stuff happens all the time where we may not hear something that our significant other is communicating. We overlook it, right? We don't give it as much importance as it is in their mind. And then to say exactly how you said it was so nice, by the way, that you recognize that you hurt them, right? That's really important. So you're not just apologizing, but you recognize. So now it's like validating as well. It's quite validating to when someone hears that you recognize that they hurt you. And then I wanted to highlight that any healthy relationship, this is the stuff that happens. I don't want to say all the time, because hopefully we don't overlook too many things, but it does happen. And repairing it in this way is so important. It's so genuine the way you described it, Josh. So I appreciate you really breaking it down like that. And then I wanted to, I think I forgot the other piece because I got caught up in your next step, actually, which seems
okay.
so, yeah.
That's okay. One of the other ways, maybe this is a different way to look at this. The thing with an apology is like an intention. It doesn't really do anything. An amends is an action. It does something. So think about it this way, if you're still lost in the difference between the two. If you've ever been in a relationship where somebody keeps saying that they intend to do something, they don't need to use the word intend, but like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this, and then they don't do it, eventually you stop believing that they're going to do it because intentions are meaningless. They're completely meaningless. All that matters at the end of the day is action. Did you actually do it? If you say you're going to do something and you do it, then I believe you. This is also true within ourselves, by the way. If you keep saying that you're going to do something, and I've been guilty. If I keep saying that I'm going to do something and then I don't do it, I start disbelieving myself. And the next time I say that I'm going to do something, I don't believe it. So the thing with an apology versus an amends is I can continue to say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. At some point, if somebody just keeps apologizing to you, it gets annoying. Okay, I get it, but you keep apologizing. Like, why don't you just change your behavior?
It gets annoying if you're not in that bubble that we were describing in part one, if you're not in that fantasy. You see, for the people who are in that fantasy, we didn't call it this in part one, but we could say it's like a psychic retreat, right? Where everything is so magical and wonderful. The apology then is like, it could be very blissful because they believe incorrectly, of course, that this is the repair and that everything now is going to be really wonderful again, right? Sort of that idealized image because we're back together. We're back in that sort of, whatever you want to call it, blissful state.
I agree with you. And I'll just tell a quick personal story because I know we got to wrap up here pretty soon.
Yes.
But I had several long-term relationships, romantic relationships, and also friendships, and also business partnerships, just a series of relationships. And if you can be honest enough with yourself and be curious, if you see a bunch of relationships that have something similar, there's only one similarity, and it's me, right? So you have to start looking at yourself, not in a shameful way, but like, what am I doing to attract this? And what I realized for a long period of my life is I was attracting a lot of relationships with people that weren't willing to take responsibility for their action and actually make amends. I was in relationship with a lot of people that would apologize and that say they would sorry for something and that they would intend to do something. But at the end of the day, they weren't actually admitting wrongdoing and they weren't actually admitting how that hurt me. And then they weren't actually willing to make changes.
Well, let's go to that last step quickly, if you don't mind, before we wrap up, because that was remember, I forgot the other part of my question because I got caught up with the next step, but that was it. I don't know if you have an example at your fingertips, Josh, but what that would actually look like, because we got the first two parts and I think we understand it pretty well, right? In terms of,
I'll give you one example. And I have plenty of these in my life. One of the ways that I try to live my life, and by all means, I make mistakes and fail at this, but I try to do this as much as possible. And that is not only to admit my wrongdoing and try to correct it, but also be open to it when somebody brings that to me, whether I think it's correct or not. I'll give you just one example that pops in my mind from a couple years ago, and this has happened several times in my life, where a friend and I got into a disagreement, and we had realized that there had been a bunch of disagreements that kind of led up to this big disagreement where we just ended up getting in this big fight. And it had probably been months and this was a really close friend of mine. And they were really hurt by something I did. And I made a mistake, went and I made an amends. I tried to understand how they felt about it. I did understand how they felt about it. I did feel really bad. And then I tried to take corrective action from that moment forward. After I did that, a little while later, I asked them, I said, do you think you did anything wrong? Do you think you owe me any sort of an amends?
No, absolutely not. No.
They said, no, why would I owe you an amends? I said, well, I think that you had some wrongdoing. Do you? No. I would only, apologize or give you an amends if I did something wrong. And then you know what I realized? It wasn't just that statement that threw me off guard. It was that I realized that was a pattern. I thought back and I thought, I don't think that this person has ever made an amends to me about anything. Now, if you're in a relationship with anybody for longer than a minute, there's going to be an amends that needs to be made. So I realized at that point, when you get to that point, what do you do? Well, for me, I chose to set, I don't want to use the term boundaries because I think people use it wrong.
Yes, I'm with you there.
I decided to change the facet of that relationship. So I decided that person can't actually be in my inner circle anymore. They can't be in the people that are influencing me because I don't want somebody who's unwilling to make amends to influence me, because I want to be the person that makes amends and I want people around me to be willing to make amends. So I had to decide that even though they were really, really close to me, I decided that they had to be out here. And that we can still have this relationship. We still have this friendship. We still to this day have this friendship. I just messaged him the other day. We still have a good relationship, but they can't be in my inner circle.
But so if they couldn't see anything, right? Like you said, and they say, no, there's nothing there that I need to apologize for. But did they know, and did you share with them at all? Had you been hurt in this as well, Josh? And were you able to share that with them?
Yep.
That's interesting.
I think that this is more common than people realize, because I think that a lot of people will just tell you what they want you to hear because we have a lot of codependence in this society. Again, me used to be one of them. And as a codependent, when somebody says something like that, somebody might just want to tell you what you want to hear or what they think you want to hear, but they're not really willing to own their stuff. If I could pick a percentage of the people that I've met in my 41 years of life that are actually willing to own their stuff and deal with it, it's a very small percentage of people.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
So
yes.
I don't think this is a rare circumstance that I've had a lot of these people in my life.
Yeah, no, the only thing that I was going to question was how close of a relationship is this actually, right? That's what I was wondering.
And that's where the difference is. It depends on what sort of relationship you're looking for. Like if you want just camaraderie, like we had experienced a lot of things together.
Yes.
And we had a lot of things in common, and we went through really tragic things together. We bonded over a lot of things. So because of that, it felt really close because I knew that I could go to this person with a lot of different things because we experienced a lot of things together. But at the end of the day, this is not somebody that can challenge me and put me to the next level of where I want to go if they're not willing to look that deeply at their own life.
Yes.
But it's hard to let go of that person.
Yes.
You hang out with every single night, wherever it is that you go, and you have all this camaraderie. You went through your divorces together. You went through a business failure together. You went through friendship failures together. You went through whatever together. And you have so much camaraderie that you just overlook this. You're like, well, it's okay. It's okay. He probably hasn't done anything really that bad. It's okay. I can overlook. At a certain point, you have to realize, like, if you really respect yourself, you need to stop overlooking it and find the person, forget the camaraderie for a second, find the person that's willing to own their stuff and move forward if that's the type of person you want to be.
All right. On that note, Josh, thank you so much. Listen, this was really helpful, and you have such important insights, and I can't express enough how much I appreciate you distinguishing or differentiating between the apology and the amends. It really gives me something to think about as well. So thank you again. We have to begin to wrap it up, unfortunately, but hopefully you and our paths will cross and we could do more of this. We could talk about the next step would be, what does it take? What does it require to let go of a relationship? Like you were saying, it's painfully difficult, but that's for a future episode.
And again, I'm going to mention to your listeners, if they want to reach out to me, I'm more than happy to provide resources for this as well. Just reach out to me on Instagram, Josh the Derelict. He'll have it in the show notes. I'm happy to provide additional resources for your listeners. Thanks for having me.
Everything will be in the show notes, and Josh in part 1, and I'm sure it still stands now. Awesome. Well, thank you again. And to everybody listening, thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, bye for now. Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.